The fabric tore before Elena even understood what was happening. 1 second she stood at the center of the founding gala, wrapped in the pale silver cloak that marked her as Luna of the Ashvale pack, and the next second a woman she barely knew was falling into her, hands grabbing at the cloth, and the sound of ripping silk cut through the music like a blade through skin. The room went silent. 200 pack members turned to look, and Elena, still holding the torn edge of the cloak in her fist, felt something twist inside her chest that had nothing to do with the fabric. The woman on the floor was Serafina. She had arrived at Ashvale only 3 weeks earlier, introduced by a cousin of the pack's old bloodline as a distant relative seeking shelter after some vague trouble in the south. She was small, soft-spoken, with wide brown eyes that always seemed on the edge of tears. Tonight she wore pale blue, a color that made her look even more delicate against the dark wood and candlelight of the hall. "I am so sorry," Serafina said, her voice trembling as she looked up at Elena from the floor. "I tripped. I did not mean to. Please forgive me." Elena reached down out of habit and helped her up. That was who Elena was. She had been raised to lead with her hands open, not closed into fists. But even as she lifted Serafina to her feet, she noticed something odd. The tear in the cloak was not a simple stumble. It ran clean along the seam, as if fingers had found the exact weak point and pulled with purpose. She dismissed the thought. It was not the kind of thing a Luna should think about her own pack member, especially not one who looked so fragile, so afraid of the room now staring at her. Across the hall, Alpha Roman was already moving. Elena expected him to come to her, to ask if she was hurt, to stand beside her the way a mate should stand beside his Luna, in front of the entire pack. Instead, his eyes went straight past her and landed on Serafina. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling in front of the smaller woman, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Elena stood there in her torn cloak, the silver fabric hanging loose at her side, and watched her husband comfort another woman, while the whole pack watched her stand alone. It was such a small thing. A cloak. Fabric could be mended. But the silence in the room said more than any words could. The elders exchanged looks. Someone near the back murmured something about omens, about how a torn Luna cloak on the night of the founding gala had not happened in 3 generations, not since the year the old pack split in 2. Elena forced her spine straight. She had learned, over the 2 years since she became Luna, that a leader who let her face show weakness gave the whole room permission to doubt her. So she smiled, thin and practiced, and said the torn cloak was nothing, an accident, nothing more. But her wolf, the quiet instinct that lived beneath her skin, did not agree. Her wolf smelled something underneath Serafina's perfume that night, something that did not belong to fear. Roman helped Serafina to a chair, fussing over her wrist, as if she had broken a bone, rather than stumbled into another person. Elena watched him from across the room, and for the first time in her marriage, she felt like a guest in her own home. Later that night, after the gala had ended, and the great hall had emptied of its guests, Roman found her in their chambers, holding the ruined cloak in her lap, running her fingers along the tier. "I am sorry about tonight," he said, though his voice carried more exhaustion than regret. "Serafina feels terrible. She has not stopped apologizing since we left the hall." "She does not need to apologize to you," Elena said quietly. "She needs to apologize to the cloak she tore. Or better, to the pack who watched their Luna stand there while her mate ran to comfort someone else." Roman sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his face with both hands. "You know how she is, fragile, nervous around new people. I did not want her to feel like the whole pack was against her on her first big night here." "And what about me?" Elena asked. "Did it not occur to you that your Luna, standing in a torn cloak in front of the entire pack, might also need someone to check on her?" He looked at her then, and for a moment, something like guilt passed over his face. "You are strong, Elena. You do not need me hovering over you the way she does." It was meant as a compliment. Elena understood that. But it landed like a verdict, like a decision he had made long before tonight, that her strength excused his absence, while her weakness would have demanded it. She said nothing more that night. She folded the torn cloak and placed it in the cedar chest at the foot of their bed, the same chest where her mother's wedding dress had once been kept, generations ago, before it passed down through the women of her family. She told herself the tear would be mended by morning, that the seamstress in the village would fix it within a day, that none of this mattered in the long run. But sleep did not come easily. Beside her, Roman's breathing slowed into the steady rhythm of a man untroubled by the evening's events. Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment the cloak tore. She thought about the way Serafina's hands had moved, quick and precise before the tumble, not the clumsy grab of someone losing their balance. She thought about the tears that came so fast and dried so completely the moment Roman looked away to speak with one of the elders. She told herself she was imagining things. Grief and jealousy could make anyone see shadows where there were none, and she was not a jealous woman by nature. She had married Roman for the way he listened to the pack's oldest members with real patience, for the way he had once carried an injured pup for 3 miles, rather than leave the child behind. She refused to believe that man had changed so quickly. And yet, the next morning, Elena rose before dawn, as she always did, to walk the training grounds before the pack woke for the day. It was her favorite hour, when the mist still clung low to the grass, and the world belonged only to her and the wolves who patrolled the borders. She had barely reached the edge of the courtyard when she saw Serafina there already, standing near the well, speaking in low tones with one of the younger guards. The conversation stopped the moment Elena's boots crunched against the gravel path. Serafina turned, and there it was again, that same wide-eyed, trembling smile, as though she had been caught doing nothing more sinister than fetching water. "Luna," Serafina said, dipping her head with practiced respect. "I hope I did not wake you." "You did not," Elena said, studying the younger guard beside her, a boy named Edwin who had only recently taken his oath to the pack. He would not meet her eyes. "I did not realize you were an early riser." "I find it hard to sleep in new places," Serafina said. "Everything still feels unfamiliar." Elena nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch a moment longer than comfort allowed. "You will find your footing here soon enough. Ashvale welcomes those who mean it no harm." The words carried more weight than a simple greeting, and Elena watched carefully to see if they landed. For the briefest instant, something flickered behind Serafina's eyes, gone before Elena could name it. Then the fragile mask slid back into place, and Serafina murmured her thanks before hurrying off toward the guest quarters, leaving Edwin standing alone by the well, looking as though he wished the ground would swallow him. Elena did not press him, not yet. She had learned patience the hard way, in the years before she became Luna, when she had watched her own mother navigate the treacherous currents of pack politics, with a calm face and a mind that never stopped calculating 3 steps ahead. Her mother used to say that the surest way to lose a fight was to reveal your hand before you understood the game. So Elena walked on, past the training grounds, past the barracks where young wolves practiced their shifting under the watchful eye of the pack's trainers, and out toward the tree line where the forest began. She needed the quiet of the woods this morning, needed to let her thoughts settle without the weight of watching eyes. As she walked, she found herself thinking not of Serafina, but of Roman, and the way his devotion had once felt like the surest thing in her life. They had been mates for 4 years now, bonded not by arrangement but by choice, by the rare and true call of true recognition that so few wolves ever experienced. She remembered the night of their bonding ceremony, how his hands had trembled as he tied the ceremonial cord around her wrist, how he had whispered that he would spend his life making sure she never doubted her place beside him. She wondered now if that promise still meant anything to him, or if it had simply become another vow worn smooth by the passage of time, the way all promises eventually did. By the time she returned to the manor, the sun had fully risen, and the pack had begun to stir. She found Roman in his study, going over reports from the northern border, and for a moment, she considered telling him everything: the strange tear in the cloak, the odd meeting by the well, the guard who would not meet her eyes, but something held her back. She had no proof yet, only instinct, and instinct alone would not be enough to convince a man who had already chosen to see fragility as truth. "You look tired," Roman said, glancing up from his papers. "I did not sleep well," Elena admitted. He set down his pen and studied her for a long moment, and for a heartbeat she thought he might finally ask the right question, might finally see past the surface of her calm expression to the storm building beneath it. Instead, he said, "I have asked Serafina to help oversee preparations for the harvest festival." She has experience with such things from her old pack, and I thought it might help her feel more welcome here. Elena felt the words land like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward long after the splash had faded. The harvest festival had always been her responsibility, passed down to her by the Luna before her, a tradition as old as the pack itself. To hand it to a newcomer, a woman who had been part of Ashvale for barely 3 weeks, felt like something far larger than a simple scheduling decision. "I see," Elena said, keeping her voice even. "And you did not think to discuss this with me first?" "I did not think it would be a problem," Roman said, and there was a note of genuine confusion in his voice, as though he truly could not understand why this might sting. "You have so much on your plate already. I thought I was helping." Elena wanted to tell him that help freely given without asking was not help at all, that it was a quiet erasure dressed up as kindness, but she held her tongue, because she could see in his face that he believed every word he said, that in his mind, he was simply being generous to a woman who needed support, without ever considering what that generosity cost his wife. "I will speak with Serafina about the arrangements," Elena said instead, her voice carefully neutral. "If she is to help, she will help under my direction, not in my place." Roman's brow furrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Of course, that is only fair." Fair. The word rang hollow in Elena's ears as she left the study, her mind already turning toward the days ahead. She did not yet know what game Serafina was playing, or how deep its roots had already grown into the soil of her marriage and her pack. But she knew, with a certainty that settled cold and clear in her chest, that she would find out. That evening, as the pack gathered for the communal meal in the great hall, Elena watched from her seat at the head table as Serafina moved through the room with practiced grace, speaking to elders about festival traditions she could not possibly have known before arriving at Ashvale, offering suggestions that Roman received with open enthusiasm. Elena smiled when spoken to, nodded when appropriate, and all the while catalogued every small detail, every misplaced word, every moment when Serafina's fragile mask slipped just enough to reveal something harder underneath. She thought of the cloak, folded away in the cedar chest, waiting to be mended. She thought of her mother's warning about revealing one's hand too soon, and she thought of the guard by the well, Edwin, who had looked at her with something that resembled fear, or perhaps guilt, before hurrying away. Whatever Serafina was building here, Elena intended to understand every piece of it before she moved to tear it down. The torn cloak was only the beginning. She could feel it in the marrow of her bones, the same way she could feel a storm coming long before the first clouds gathered on the horizon. She would need allies, she would need proof, and most of all, she would need patience, the kind of patience that had carried generations of Luna before her through crises far greater than a single torn piece of silk. As the meal ended and the pack began to disperse into the cool evening air, Elena caught Serafina's eye across the hall. The smaller woman offered her usual trembling smile, the picture of fragile innocence. Elena returned it with one of her own, calm and unreadable, giving nothing away. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The trust Elena had once extended freely, the benefit of the doubt she gave to every newcomer who crossed into Ashvale's protection, had begun to erode, replaced by a quiet, watchful resolve. She would not confront Serafina yet. She would not confront Roman either, not until she understood the full shape of what was happening around her. Instead, she would watch, and wait, and gather the threads of truth one careful strand at a time, until the picture became too clear for anyone to deny. The torn cloak sat in the cedar chest that night, waiting for the seamstress's needle, but Elena knew, as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, that some tears could not be mended with thread alone. Some tears revealed the truth of what lay underneath, and once seen, could never again be unseen. Outside her window, the moon hung full and silver over the Ashvale territory, casting long shadows across the training grounds where, hours earlier, a fragile stranger had stood a little too comfortably for someone still finding her footing in a new home. Elena did not yet have all the answers, but she had a beginning, and a beginning, she reminded herself, was often the hardest part. Tomorrow, she would start pulling at the threads Serafina had woven so carefully into the fabric of pack life. Tomorrow she would begin the slow, careful work of uncovering exactly who this woman was, and what she truly wanted from Ashvale, from Roman, and from the Luna cloak she had torn so precisely on her very first public night among them. For now, Elena closed her eyes and let the darkness take her, knowing that whatever storm was coming, she would not face it unprepared. The wine spilled across Elena's dress at exactly the wrong moment, staining the pale gold fabric a deep, ugly red, just as the pack's oldest elder rose to give his toast in her honor. Serafina gasped, pressing both hands to her mouth, the empty glass still trembling in her fingers. "I am so clumsy," she said, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine distress. "I did not see you standing there. I am so sorry, Luna." Elena looked down at the spreading stain, then back up at Serafina's wide, tearful eyes, and felt the same cold recognition she had felt 3 weeks earlier, when the cloak had torn. This was not clumsiness. This was a pattern, and patterns did not happen by accident. The elder, a stern old wolf named Edmund, who had served 3 generations of Ashvale leadership, paused his toast and frowned at the interruption. "Perhaps we should continue this celebration another time," he said, clearly displeased at having his moment disrupted. "No, please," Elena said quickly, forcing warmth into her voice even as her stomach twisted with something close to fury. "Continue, Edmund. A little wine never stopped a celebration." She excused herself only long enough to change, refusing to let the incident derail the evening entirely, though she noticed the way several younger pack members exchanged glances as she left the hall, the way whispers followed her down the corridor. 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, Serafina had managed to become the center of gossip that always somehow painted Elena as either too harsh or too fragile herself, depending on how each incident unfolded. When Elena returned in a fresh dress, the celebration had resumed, and Serafina sat close to Roman's side, her hand resting lightly on his forearm as she laughed at something he had said. Elena took her seat and said nothing, though she noted, with the same careful precision she had begun applying to everything Serafina did, that the woman's hand lingered a beat longer than friendship required. Later that week, a seating chart for the Elders' Council dinner went missing, and when it reappeared, several names had been rearranged, placing 2 rival families beside each other, in a way that nearly sparked an argument before the meal had even been served. Elena managed to smooth things over, moving place cards with practiced calm, but she caught Serafina watching from across the room, her expression unreadable for just a moment, before slipping back into concerned innocence. "Is everything all right?" Serafina asked, approaching Elena as the guests took their seats. "I heard there was some confusion with the arrangements." "Everything is handled," Elena said, "though I do wonder how the chart came to be rearranged in the first place. I said it myself just yesterday morning." "Perhaps one of the staff moved it while cleaning," Serafina offered, her tone light, almost bored, as though the question held no weight at all. "These things happen." "Perhaps," Elena said, though she did not believe it for a moment. That night, after the guests had gone and the manor had settled into its usual quiet, Elena sat with Marcus in the small study off the eastern wing, a room she had claimed as her own shortly after becoming Luna, filled with books on pack law and history that few others in Ashvale bothered to read. Marcus had served as beta under the previous alpha, Roman's father, before retiring to a quieter role as an advisor to the council. He was one of the few people in the pack whose loyalty Elena had never once questioned. "You look like you have not slept in days," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I have not," Elena admitted. "Not properly, not since the gala." She told him everything then, the torn cloak, the spilled wine, the rearranged seating chart, the way Serafina always managed to appear fragile and blameless while chaos unfolded around her, and the way Roman consistently sided with the newcomer, framing every incident as an accident born of nervousness rather than intention. Marcus listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing more thoughtful with each detail Elena shared. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire that crackled in the small hearth. "I have noticed things too," he finally said. "Small things. The way she asks questions about the pack's history that seem too specific for someone claiming to be a distant relative who has never visited before. The way she knows the layout of the old records room, though as far as I know, she has never been given a tour of it." Elena leaned forward. "What kind of questions?" She asked me once about the succession laws, Marcus said, about what happens if an alpha has no direct heir and takes a mate outside the traditional bloodline. She framed it as idle curiosity, but the question was too precise to be idle. A chill ran down Elena's spine. She had not considered succession, not truly, not beyond the vague anxiety that came with watching her husband grow closer to another woman, but the word heir carried weight in pack law that went far beyond simple jealousy. An heir determined the future of the entire territory, the loyalty of every family within it, the balance of power that had held Ashvale together for generations. You think she is after more than Roman's attention, Elena said slowly. I think, Marcus said carefully, that we should find out exactly who Serafina really is, before we assume anything else. Elena agreed immediately. Her story does not add up. She claims to be a distant relative through her grandmother's line, but no one has ever heard of that branch of the family before her arrival. I want to know where she truly comes from. Marcus nodded slowly, the firelight casting deep shadows across his face. I still have contacts from my years as Beta, wolves who keep records of the old bloodlines, the exiled packs, the families who scattered after the wars generations ago. If Serafina's story is false, someone out there will remember the truth. How long will it take? Weeks, perhaps, Marcus said. These things cannot be rushed without drawing attention. If she notices we are asking questions, she will only become more careful, and we will lose whatever advantage surprise gives us. Elena understood the wisdom in his caution, even as impatience gnawed at her. Every day that passed was another day Serafina wove herself deeper into the fabric of Ashvale. Another day Roman leaned a little further away from his wife, and a little closer to a stranger, whose kindness felt increasingly rehearsed. There is something else, Elena said, hesitating only briefly before continuing. Edwin, one of the younger guards, met with her privately, near the well the morning after the gala. He would not meet my eyes when I found them together. I think he knows something. Then perhaps it is time someone spoke with young Edwin, Marcus said, carefully, without alarming him into silence. They spent the rest of the evening mapping out a plan, quiet and deliberate, the kind of strategy Elena's mother had once taught her during long nights of instruction on pack politics. They would gather information from multiple directions at once, Marcus reaching out to his old contacts about Serafina's true bloodline, Elena finding a way to speak privately with Edwin, and both of them watching, always watching, for the next small crack in Serafina's carefully constructed performance. The following morning, Elena found Edwin alone at the training grounds, practicing his forms with a wooden staff, his movements sharp, but lacking the focus of someone whose mind was fully present. She approached slowly, giving him time to notice her before she spoke, careful not to startle him into defensiveness. You have improved since the last time I watched you train, she said, keeping her tone light. Edwin startled anyway, nearly dropping the staff before recovering his grip. Luna, I did not see you there. I did not mean to interrupt, Elena said. I only wanted to ask you something, if you have a moment. He nodded warily, his eyes flicking toward the manor, as though checking whether anyone watched them. The morning after the founding gala, Elena said carefully, I saw you speaking with Serafina near the well. I do not mean to pry into private conversations, but I could not help noticing how quickly the conversation stopped when I arrived. Edwin's grip tightened on the staff, and for a moment, Elena thought he might simply refuse to answer, might retreat into the same practiced silence Serafina wore so well. But something in his expression shifted, a flicker of the discomfort he had clearly been carrying alone. She asked me not to mention it, he said finally, his voice low. She said it was nothing important, just questions about the pack's border patrols. But it felt strange, Luna. She wanted to know when the patrols changed shifts, which paths they took through the northern woods, how often the perimeter was checked at night. Elena kept her expression carefully neutral, though her mind raced through the implications. Border patrols, shift changes. These were not the questions of a woman simply curious about her new home. These were the questions of someone planning something, someone who needed to know when the pack's defenses were thinnest. Did she say why she wanted to know? Elena asked. She said she wanted to feel safe, Edwin said. That she had bad memories from wherever she came from before, and knowing the patrol schedule helped her sleep at night. Putzing. It was, Elena thought, a reasonable enough excuse on its surface, the kind of explanation that would satisfy most people without a second thought. But combined with everything else, the torn cloak, the spilled wine, the rearranged seating chart, the pointed questions about succession law, it painted a picture far more troubling than simple nervousness in a new environment. "Thank you for telling me," Elena said gently. "You have done nothing wrong, Edwin. But I would ask that you keep this conversation between us, for now. And if Serafina asks you anything else unusual, I would appreciate knowing about it." Edwin nodded, visibly relieved to have shared the burden he had clearly been carrying. "Of course, Luna. I am sorry I did not say something sooner." "You have said something now," Elena replied. "That is what matters." As she walked back toward the manor, the morning mist still clinging to the grass around her boots, Elena felt the shape of the puzzle beginning to sharpen, even as its full picture remained frustratingly out of reach. Serafina was not simply a fragile newcomer seeking shelter and comfort. She was gathering information, positioning herself carefully within the pack's social structure, and asking questions about succession that no innocent guest would think to raise. Elena thought of Roman, of the way he had defended Serafina's clumsiness at every turn, the way he had handed over the harvest festival preparations without a second thought, the way his hand had rested against Serafina's shoulder at the gala while his wife stood alone in a torn cloak. She wondered how much of his behavior was genuine kindness, and how much had been carefully cultivated by a woman who understood exactly which strings to pull to earn an alpha's protective instincts. She did not yet have proof of anything beyond suspicion and circumstance, but suspicion, when it stacked high enough, became its own kind of evidence, at least enough to justify continuing to dig. That afternoon, Marcus sent word through a trusted messenger that he had reached out to an old contact, a retired record keeper who had once cataloged the bloodlines of every pack in the region, including those long since scattered or exiled. The response would take time, but Marcus seemed confident that if Serafina's claimed lineage was false, the truth would eventually surface. Elena spent the rest of the day attending to her usual duties, overseeing the distribution of supplies to the pack's outer farms, settling a minor dispute between two families over grazing rights, reviewing reports from the border patrols that Serafina had asked Edwin about so pointedly. Everything appeared normal on the surface, the steady rhythm of pack life continuing as it always had. But beneath that surface, Elena felt the current of something dangerous building, slow and patient, the way a river gathers force long before it breaks its banks. That evening she found Roman in their chambers, reviewing correspondence from a neighboring territory. He looked up as she entered, offering her a tired smile. "Long day?" he asked. "Every day feels long lately," Elena said, settling into the chair across from him. "How are the preparations for the harvest festival coming along?" "Serafina has been a great help," Roman said, and Elena noted the warmth in his voice, the ease with which he spoke the other woman's name. "She has arranged for musicians from the eastern villages, and she has a wonderful idea for decorating the Great Hall this year." "How generous of her," Elena said, keeping her voice light despite the tightness in her chest. "Has she mentioned anything about her family? I find myself curious about her background, given how involved she has become in our traditions." Roman shrugged, seemingly unbothered by the question. "She does not like to talk about her past much. I think there was some difficulty with her old pack before she came here. I have not pressed her on it. She deserves privacy, given everything she has been through." "Of course," Elena said, though privately she wondered exactly what difficulty Roman imagined, and whether he had ever asked Serafina a single pointed question about the vague troubles she claimed to have fled. She did not press the matter further that night, unwilling to reveal her growing suspicions before she had gathered enough proof to make them undeniable. Instead, she turned the conversation toward other matters, the border reports, the upcoming council meeting, the small daily concerns of running a territory that still, despite everything, required her full attention. But as she lay awake that night, listening to Roman's steady breathing beside her, Elena found herself returning again and again to Edwin's words: patrol schedules, shift changes, weak points in the northern woods. Whatever Serafina was planning, it was not simply about winning Roman's affection or securing a place of comfort within Ashvale. It was something larger, something that required knowledge of the pack's defenses, something that suggested Seraphina saw Ashvale not as a refuge, but as a target. Elena thought of her mother's old lessons on patience, on the danger of moving too quickly before all the pieces of a puzzle had revealed themselves. She would wait for Marcus's contact to confirm or deny Seraphina's claimed lineage. She would continue watching, gathering, piecing together the fragments of truth hidden beneath layers of practiced fragility. But she would not wait forever. Whatever storm Seraphina was building toward, Elena intended to be ready long before it broke. A raven arrived at dawn, carrying a message tied with old gray twine, and Elena knew before she even opened it that the answer had finally come. Marcus met her in the eastern study, his face grave in a way that told her the news was not good, though whether it confirmed or worsened her suspicions, she could not yet tell. He unrolled the parchment carefully, smoothing it across the desk between them. "My contact remembers the name Seraphina," he said, "but not as a distant relative of any Ashvale bloodline. She remembers a family that fits the description far too closely for comfort." "Tell me," Elena said, bracing herself. "The Draven clan," Marcus said, and the name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Exiled from these lands 3 generations ago, after they attempted to seize control of a neighboring territory through deception rather than open challenge. They were driven out, scattered across the region, forbidden from returning to any pack connected to the old alliance that condemned them. Elena had heard stories of the Draven clan growing up, whispered warnings from her mother about a family so consumed by ambition that they had nearly torn apart the fragile peace between territories. She had always assumed the clan had died out, faded into irrelevance after their exile, the way most forgotten conflicts eventually did. "You believe Seraphina is one of them," Elena said. "My contact cannot say with certainty," Marcus admitted. The Draven bloodline scattered so completely after the exile that tracking individual descendants became nearly impossible. But the timing, the manner, the pattern of behavior you have described, it all fits a strategy the Draven were known for. They rarely challenged directly. They preferred to work from within, gaining trust before revealing their true intentions. Elena stared at the parchment, at the careful handwriting detailing decades-old history that suddenly felt disturbingly relevant. If she is Draven, what would she want from Ashvale? What would be worth infiltrating an entire pack for? Marcus met her eyes, and the answer he gave chilled her more than she expected. Control of the bloodline. If Seraphina could position herself as carrying Roman's heir, a child born to the Alpha, that child would hold a legitimate claim to Ashvale's leadership, regardless of the mother's origins. It would be the ultimate revenge for an exile the Draven never accepted as just, seizing the very territory their ancestors were driven from, not through open conflict, but through succession. The room seemed to grow colder as the implications settled over Elena. She thought of the questions about succession law Seraphina had asked Marcus, the pointed inquiries about what happened when an alpha had no direct heir and took a mate outside the traditional bloodline. She thought of the warmth in Roman's voice whenever he spoke Seraphina's name, the way he defended her at every turn, the way he had grown steadily more distant from his own wife over the past month. "We need proof," Elena said, her voice steady, despite the storm building inside her. "Suspicion and old history will not be enough to convince Roman. Not when he has already chosen to see her as fragile and blameless. We need something undeniable. Then we watch her more closely," Marcus said, "and we move carefully. If she suspects we know the truth, she may act before we are ready to expose her." They spent the following days building a quiet network of observation throughout the pack, trusted members who owed Marcus loyalty from his years as beta, wolves who could watch Seraphina's movements without drawing suspicion. Elena herself continued her public duties as though nothing had changed, smiling through council meetings, overseeing festival preparations, playing the role of a Luna untroubled by rumor or gossip, all while her mind worked constantly beneath the surface. It was nearly 2 weeks later when the first real piece of evidence emerged. One of the kitchen staff, a young woman named Charlotte who had worked at the manor since childhood, approached Elena privately after the evening meal, her expression anxious. "Luna, I do not know if this means anything," Charlotte said, glancing over her shoulder before continuing. "But Seraphina asked me last week to prepare a special tea for her each morning. Something for nausea. I did not think much of it at first, but she asked me not to mention it to anyone, and I have been feeling uneasy about keeping the secret. Elena felt her pulse quicken. What kind of tea? Ginger and mint, mostly, Charlotte said. The kind we prepare for expectant mothers in their early months. The words hung in the air between them, confirming what Elena had begun to suspect, but had not yet allowed herself to fully believe. Serafina was pregnant, and she had been keeping it hidden from the pack, hidden from everyone except a kitchen maid sworn to secrecy. Thank you for telling me, Charlotte, Elena said, keeping her voice calm despite the storm raging beneath her composed exterior. You have done the right thing. Please continue preparing the tea as she requests, and say nothing to anyone else about this conversation. Charlotte nodded, clearly relieved to have shared the burden, and hurried back toward the kitchens. Elena found Marcus that same evening, relaying what she had learned. His expression grew even more grave as she spoke. If she is carrying a child, Marcus said slowly, and if that child is presented as Roman's heir, the timing suggests she conceived not long after her arrival at Ashvale, which raises a troubling question. Whether the child is truly his, Elena finished, the thought having already crossed her own mind more than once in the sleepless hours of the past several nights. The Draven clan valued cunning above honor, Marcus said carefully. If Serafina's goal is to place a false heir into Ashvale's bloodline, the child's true parentage may matter far less to her than the claim she intends to make. Elena sat in silence for a long moment, processing the full weight of what they had uncovered. A hidden pregnancy, a likely false claim to Ashvale's bloodline. A family history rooted in ambition and deception, exiled generations ago for attempting exactly this kind of scheme against a neighboring territory. The pieces fit together with a precision that left little room for innocent explanation. We need the letter, Elena said finally. If Serafina has been communicating with anyone from the Draven clan, coordinating this plan, there will be evidence somewhere. Letters, messages, something that connects her actions to a larger scheme rather than simple opportunism. That will not be easy to find, Marcus warned. She has proven careful in everything else. She is unlikely to leave evidence lying in plain sight. Then we will need to be cleverer than she is, Elena said, a new resolve settling over her, cold and steady, replacing the uncertainty that had plagued her since the night the Cloak first tore. She has spent weeks building her position within this pack through careful manipulation. I intend to spend whatever time is necessary uncovering every thread of her deception, until there is nothing left for her to hide behind. Over the following days, Elena's network of trusted allies expanded further, though always carefully, always with an eye toward avoiding detection. Charlotte continued preparing Serafina's tea, reporting any small detail that seemed relevant. Edwin, having overcome his initial reluctance, kept watch over the northern patrol routes Serafina had asked about so pointedly weeks earlier, noting any unusual activity near the borders. Marcus continued corresponding with his old contacts, piecing together fragments of the Draven clan's scattered history, searching for any connection that might lead them closer to proof. Elena herself began paying closer attention to Serafina's correspondence, noting the messenger birds that occasionally arrived for her, the letters she received, and quickly tucked away before anyone could glimpse their contents. She could not simply seize Serafina's private correspondence without cause, not without risking exposure of her own investigation before she had gathered enough evidence to act. But she watched, and waited, and catalogued every detail, building a case with the same patience her mother had once taught her, brick by careful brick. The Harvest Festival arrived in the midst of this quiet investigation, a celebration Serafina had helped plan with an enthusiasm that now struck Elena as deeply calculated, rather than genuinely welcoming. The great hall was decorated beautifully, musicians from the eastern villages filling the air with music, the pack gathering in their finest clothes to celebrate another successful season. Elena played her role perfectly throughout the evening, smiling, greeting guests, overseeing the celebration with the same grace she had always brought to such occasions. But she watched Serafina throughout the night, noting the way the woman's hand occasionally drifted to her stomach when she thought no one was looking, the way she declined wine that evening, with a quiet excuse about feeling unwell, the way Roman hovered near her with an attentiveness that had once belonged entirely to his wife. Near the end of the celebration, As guests began to depart and the hall slowly emptied, Elena found herself alone with Roman for the first time in what felt like weeks. He looked tired but satisfied, pleased with how the evening had unfolded. "The festival was beautiful this year," he said. "Serafina has quite the eye for these things." "She has certainly made herself indispensable," Elena said carefully, watching his reaction. Roman smiled, oblivious to the weight beneath her words. "I am glad she has found a place here. She deserves happiness after everything she has been through." Elena wanted, more than anything, to tell him everything in that moment. The tea, the suspected pregnancy, the connection to the exiled Draven clan, the pattern of small manipulations that had defined Serafina's entire presence at Ashvale since her arrival. But she held her tongue, remembering Marcus's warning about moving too quickly, about the danger of confronting Serafina before they had undeniable proof. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "I hope she finds the happiness she is looking for." The words carried a double meaning Roman did not catch, too wrapped up in his own satisfaction with the evening to notice the careful calculation behind his wife's calm expression. Elena watched him retreat toward his study, already thinking of the next day's business, and felt the full weight of how far he had drifted from her, how completely Serafina had woven herself into the fabric of his attention. But Elena was not without resources of her own. She had allies now, quiet and loyal, watching every corner of Ashvale that Serafina might try to hide within. She had Marcus, whose knowledge of pack law and history proved invaluable at every turn, and she had her own sharp mind, honed by years of careful observation and patient strategy, refusing to be fooled by a fragile mask that concealed something far more dangerous underneath. Somewhere out there, Elena knew, existed the proof she needed: a letter, a message, some undeniable connection between Serafina and the Draven clan's ambitions to reclaim what they believed had been unjustly taken from them generations ago. She intended to find it, no matter how long it took, no matter how carefully Serafina had hidden her tracks. The storm was coming. Elena could feel it building with each passing day, each small revelation adding weight to a truth that would eventually become too heavy to conceal. And when it finally broke, she intended to be standing ready, not as a victim wronged by circumstance, but as a Luna prepared to defend everything her pack had built across generations, against a threat that had walked through their gates, disguised as fragility itself. The old watchtower had stood empty for years, its stone walls crumbling at the edges, forgotten by most of the pack, except for the occasional guard assigned to check its structural safety. So when Elena spotted a faint light flickering from its narrow window well past midnight, every instinct she had told her something was wrong. She had been unable to sleep again, restless with the weight of everything Marcus had uncovered, and had taken to walking the grounds in the quiet hours before dawn, when the manor was still, and her thoughts could finally settle into some kind of order. It was during one of these walks that she noticed the light, small and steady, coming from a tower that should have held nothing but dust and old memories. Elena moved closer, careful to keep to the shadows cast by the surrounding trees, her wolf senses sharpening with each step. As she approached, voices drifted down from the tower's upper level, low and urgent, carried on the still night air. She recognized Roman's voice first, tense in a way she rarely heard from him. And then, unmistakably, Serafina's voice answered, stripped of its usual trembling fragility, replaced by something far more direct and calculating. Elena pressed herself against the cold stone wall at the tower's base, straining to hear the conversation drifting down from above. "Cannot keep meeting like this," Roman was saying. "If Elena discovers us here, she will ask questions I do not know how to answer." "She suspects nothing," Serafina replied, her voice carrying a confidence that made Elena's stomach twist. "She is too consumed with pack duties to notice what happens right in front of her." Elena's jaw tightened at the assumption, at the casual dismissal of her intelligence, but she forced herself to remain still, to listen rather than react. "The timing needs to be right," Serafina continued. "When the child comes, the pack must already trust me. They must already see me as someone who belongs here, not as an outsider making demands." "And Elena?" Roman asked, and something in his voice made Elena's breath catch, a note of genuine conflict that suggested he was not entirely the willing accomplice she had begun to fear. "Elena will understand, in time," Serafina said smoothly. Pack law favors the child regardless of circumstance. Once the heir is born, everything else becomes a formality. Elena had heard enough. She retreated carefully into the shadows, her mind racing through the fragments of conversation she had just overheard. The child. The timing. Serafina's confidence that Elena suspected nothing, that the pack would simply accept whatever claim she intended to make once her child was born. But one detail troubled Elena more than any other. A detail that did not fit the picture Marcus had painted of a Draven clan schemer coldly manipulating an alpha for political gain. Roman's voice had carried genuine unease, genuine conflict about deceiving his wife. Whatever was happening between him and Serafina, it was not simply the cold calculation of a man fully complicit in a plot against his own pack. Elena made her way back to the manor in silence, her thoughts a tangled storm of anger, confusion, and a grief she had not allowed herself to fully feel until that moment. She had suspected Serafina's deception for weeks now, had gathered evidence pointing toward a dangerous scheme rooted in old family ambition. But hearing Roman's voice, hearing the conflict in his tone, even as he continued meeting secretly with the woman, threatening everything Elena had built, cut deeper than she had expected. She did not confront him that night. She could not trust her own composure enough to face him without revealing everything she had learned, without risking the careful investigation she and Marcus had spent weeks constructing. Instead, she returned to their chambers and lay awake until dawn, watching the ceiling, replaying every word she had overheard, searching for some explanation that did not end with her husband as either a willing participant or a fool being led carefully toward his own downfall. When Roman finally returned to their chambers just before sunrise, slipping in quietly, as though he believed her still asleep, Elena kept her eyes closed and her breathing steady, unwilling to give away what she now knew. She felt the weight of the bed shift as he settled beside her, and for a long moment, neither of them moved, the silence between them heavier than either could have known. The next morning, Elena sought out Marcus immediately, relaying everything she had overheard in the watchtower. His expression grew increasingly troubled as she spoke, though he remained calm and measured, as he always did when the situation called for careful thought rather than immediate reaction. "This confirms much of what we suspected," Marcus said, "but it also raises new questions. If Roman is meeting with her secretly, discussing timing and the pack's reaction to a coming heir, he is either fully aware of her true intentions and complicit in the deception, or he genuinely believes the child is his and has been drawn into secrecy for reasons he does not fully understand himself." "I do not believe he knows about the Draven bloodline," Elena said slowly, working through the possibilities as she spoke. "I do not believe he understands what Serafina truly is, but he is hiding something from me, meeting with her in secret, discussing a child in ways that suggest he believes it to be his own." "Then he has been deceived as thoroughly as the rest of the pack," Marcus said, "perhaps more thoroughly, given the intimacy of the deception." Elena felt a strange mixture of relief and renewed anger at this possibility. Relief, because it meant Roman was not knowingly betraying his pack alongside a woman seeking to destroy everything Ashvale had built. Anger, because it meant Serafina had manipulated him so completely that he could not see the danger standing directly beside him, wearing his trust like a carefully tailored disguise. "We need that proof now more than ever," Elena said. "If Roman believes the child is his, only undeniable evidence will convince him of the truth. He will not simply take my word against hers, not when he has spent weeks defending her against every accusation, however small." Marcus nodded in agreement. "My contact has sent word of another possible lead, a retired guard who once served the Draven clan before their exile, now living quietly in a village 2 days' ride from here. If anyone can confirm Serafina's true identity and intentions, it may be him." "Then we go to him," Elena said without hesitation. "Elena, think carefully," Marcus cautioned. "If you leave Ashvale, even briefly, Serafina will have free rein to further embed herself in Roman's trust. And traveling 2 days each way leaves considerable time for things to change here in your absence." Elena considered this, weighing the risks against the necessity of finding proof strong enough to convince Roman of the truth. "I cannot investigate this fully while remaining visible within the pack. Every question I ask, every suspicious glance I direct toward Serafina, risks alerting her to what we already know. I need to move where she cannot watch me. Then let me go, Marcus offered. I have made this journey before, in my years as beta. I know the roads, and I know how to ask careful questions without drawing unwanted attention. Elena hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Marcus's experience and discretion made him the wiser choice for such a delicate mission, and remaining behind would allow her to continue monitoring Seraphina's movements within Ashvale itself, watching for any further evidence that might emerge before Marcus returned. Be careful, Elena said, as they finalized the plan. If Seraphina truly has connections within the Draven network, word of your inquiries could reach her before you return. I have kept secrets before, Marcus said with a faint, reassuring smile. I do not intend to lose my skill for it now. Marcus departed early the following morning, before the manor had fully woken, taking only a single horse and the barest essentials for the journey. Elena watched him ride toward the tree line from her window, feeling the weight of everything resting on his safe return, on whatever truth he might uncover from a retired guard who had once served the very family now threatening to unravel everything Ashvale had built across generations. The days that followed felt impossibly long. Elena continued her public duties with practiced composure, attending council meetings, overseeing pack business, maintaining the appearance of a Luna, untroubled by rumor or suspicion. But every interaction with Seraphina now carried a new weight. Every trembling smile and fragile excuse, a performance Elena watched with sharpened, knowing eyes. She found herself studying Roman more closely as well, searching for signs of the conflict she had heard in his voice that night at the watchtower. She noticed, now that she was truly looking, the way his smile toward Seraphina sometimes did not quite reach his eyes, the way he occasionally seemed to catch himself before saying something, as though weighing words carefully before releasing them. Whatever secret he carried, it clearly cost him something, even if he did not yet understand the full truth of what he had become entangled in. On the third day of Marcus's absence, Elena received a message from Charlotte, the kitchen maid, who had first revealed Seraphina's secret pregnancy tea weeks earlier. Seraphina had begun asking questions about the manor's private records room, specifically about historical documents, detailing the pack's founding bloodlines and succession laws. Elena's pulse quickened at this news. If Seraphina was seeking access to Ashvale's founding records, she was likely searching for legal loopholes or precedents that would strengthen whatever claim she intended to make once her child was born. It confirmed, once again, that Seraphina's actions were driven not by simple opportunism, but by careful, long-term planning rooted in a deep understanding of pack law. Elena made her way to the records room herself that evening, moving through the shelves of ancient documents and bound histories that chronicled generations of Ashvale's leadership. She searched carefully, looking for any sign that Seraphina had already accessed certain documents, any disturbed dust or misplaced volumes that might reveal what specifically the woman had been researching. She found it eventually, tucked in a section detailing historical disputes over succession, a section that included, buried among older records, an account of the very conflict that had led to the Draven clan's exile 3 generations earlier. The pages showed clear signs of recent handling, the dust disturbed in a way that suggested careful, repeated reading, rather than a single casual glance. Elena studied the account herself, learning details of the original conflict that Marcus had not shared, perhaps because he did not know them himself. The Draven clan, the records explained, had attempted to seize control of a neighboring territory, not through direct challenge, but by presenting a child born to a Draven woman as the rightful heir of that territory's alpha, claiming a secret bonding that had never truly occurred. The scheme had been uncovered only through careful investigation, much like the one Elena now found herself conducting, and the resulting scandal had led to the clan's complete exile from every allied territory in the region. The parallel was unmistakable. Seraphina was not simply drawing inspiration from her family's history, she was repeating it, almost exactly, generations later, in a different territory, but with the same fundamental strategy that had once nearly torn apart the balance of power across the entire region. Elena closed the ancient volume carefully, her hands steady despite the storm of emotion building beneath her calm exterior. She now understood, with complete clarity, exactly what Seraphina intended to accomplish at Ashvale. The only question remaining was whether Marcus would return with proof strong enough to stop her before the scheme reached its final, irreversible stage. Marcus returned on the 5th day, his horse lathered from hard riding, his face carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who had learned something he wished he had not needed to know. Elena met him at the stables herself, unwilling to wait even the few minutes it would take for him to reach the manor properly. "Tell me," she said, before he had even fully dismounted. "The guard remembered her," Marcus said, his voice low despite the empty courtyard around them. "Not by the name Serafina, but he recognized the description immediately when I described her. The wide eyes, the trembling voice, the delicate manner that conceals something far sharper underneath. He called her by another name, Lysandra, daughter of the Draven line that survived the exile, raised from childhood to reclaim what her family lost." Elena felt the confirmation settle over her like a physical weight, both a relief and a burden at once. Suspicion had finally hardened into certainty. "He told me more," Marcus continued, leading his horse toward the stable as they spoke, keeping his voice quiet enough that only Elena could hear. "The Draven clan never accepted their exile as just. For 3 generations, they have watched for opportunities to reclaim territory through the old strategy that first brought their downfall, presenting a false heir as legitimate, using pack law itself as the weapon to seize what they could not win through open challenge. Lysandra was chosen specifically for this task because of her ability to appear harmless, fragile, exactly the kind of woman a proud alpha would feel compelled to protect rather than question." "And the child?" Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer. "The guard could not say for certain whether the child is Roman's," Marcus admitted. "But he confirmed that the Draven strategy has always relied on timing rather than truth. If Lysandra conceived shortly before or shortly after arriving at Ashvale, by another means entirely, and simply allowed Roman to believe otherwise, the child's true parentage would matter far less than the claim she intends to present." Elena's stomach turned at the implication, though she forced herself to remain focused on the larger truth Marcus had uncovered, rather than the personal wound underlying it. Whatever pain this revelation might eventually cause her marriage, the greater danger lay in what Lysandra intended for the pack itself, for the bloodline and leadership that generations of Ashvale wolves had built and protected. "Did he have proof?" Elena asked. "Something we can present to Roman and the council, beyond a guard's memory and a resemblance to an old description?" Marcus's expression grew even more serious. "He gave me something better. A letter, written years ago by Lysandra's own mother, detailing the family's plan to reclaim Ashvale specifically, naming it among several territories the Draven clan hoped to eventually infiltrate. The guard kept it after leaving the clan's service, uncertain what to do with such dangerous knowledge, but willing to part with it now that the plan appears to be unfolding exactly as the letter described." He produced the document from within his travel cloak, worn with age but still legible, the ink faded, but the words unmistakable. Elena read it carefully by the dim light of the stable lanterns, her breath catching as she recognized names and details that connected directly to everything she had observed since Lysandra's arrival at Ashvale, under the false name Serafina. The letter spoke of patience, of positioning a daughter carefully within a target territory, of exploiting an alpha's protective instincts toward apparent fragility, of timing a pregnancy to coincide with growing trust within the pack. It named Ashvale specifically, along with 2 other territories the Draven clan had considered as potential targets for their long-delayed revenge against the alliance that had exiled them generations earlier. "This is enough," Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion the letter had stirred within her. "This is more than enough to expose her before the entire council." "We should move carefully still," Marcus cautioned. "If Lysandra suspects we have this proof before we are ready to present it formally, she may attempt to flee, or worse, accelerate whatever plan she still intends to execute." Elena nodded, understanding the wisdom in his caution even as impatience burned within her to confront the woman who had spent weeks tearing apart the trust and stability of everything Ashvale represented. "We need to bring this to Roman first, privately. He deserves to hear the truth before it becomes a matter for the entire council to judge." "Are you certain that is wise?" Marcus asked. "If he still believes the child is his, this revelation may be difficult for him to accept, regardless of the proof we present." He is still my mate, Elena said, though the words carried a complicated weight, given everything she now understood about his secret meetings with Lysandra. And he is still alpha of this pack. He deserves the chance to see the truth clearly before we take this matter before the council. If nothing else, I owe him that much, even after everything. They agreed to approach Roman together the following morning, giving Elena the night to prepare herself for a conversation she knew would fracture whatever remained of the trust between them, regardless of how Roman ultimately responded to the evidence they had gathered. She spent the evening in quiet reflection, reviewing every detail Marcus had uncovered, every fragment of overheard conversation from the watchtower, every small manipulation Lysandra had woven into the fabric of pack life since her arrival. She thought, too, of her own role in what was to come. As Luna, her responsibility extended beyond her personal marriage to the well-being of the entire pack, to protecting the bloodline and leadership structure that generations before her had fought to establish and maintain. Whatever pain this confrontation caused her personally, the greater duty demanded she act, clearly and decisively, to protect Ashvale from a threat that had nearly succeeded in infiltrating its very foundation. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, fitting weather for the conversation Elena knew was coming. She found Roman in his study, as she often did, reviewing reports from the pack's various holdings. He looked up as she entered, his expression shifting to concern when he noticed Marcus following close behind her, the older wolf's face grave in a way that clearly signaled something serious. "What is this about?" Roman asked, setting down his papers. "We need to speak with you," Elena said, closing the study door behind them. "About Serafina, about the child she carries, and about who she truly is." Roman's expression tightened immediately, a flicker of something that might have been fear crossing his features before he composed himself into careful neutrality. "What are you talking about?" "I know about your meetings in the old watchtower," Elena said, watching him carefully as she spoke. "I know you have been discussing the timing of the child's birth, discussing how the pack will react once the heir is presented. I overheard you myself, 5 nights ago." Roman's face paled slightly, but he did not immediately deny it, and Elena took some small measure of relief in his honesty, even in the face of everything else. "I was going to tell you," he said quietly. "I did not know how. Serafina asked me to keep it quiet until she felt more secure in her place here, worried about how the pack might judge her given the circumstances." "Roman," Elena said gently, though her voice carried an unmistakable weight of authority, "her name is not Serafina, it is Lysandra. She is the daughter of the Draven clan, exiled from these territories 3 generations ago for attempting exactly what she is attempting now." The color drained further from Roman's face as Marcus stepped forward, producing the faded letter he had carried back from his journey. He laid it carefully on the desk between them, and Roman read it in silence, his hands beginning to tremble as he processed the full weight of what the document revealed. "This cannot be true," he said finally, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried in previous defenses of Serafina, or rather, Lysandra. "She has been nothing but gentle, nothing but grateful for the shelter Ashvale has given her." "Gentleness can be a mask," Elena said, "worn as carefully as any weapon. I do not say this to hurt you, Roman. I say this because our pack, our people, deserve protection from a threat that very nearly succeeded in claiming leadership through deception rather than truth." Roman sat heavily in his chair, staring at the letter, at the careful handwriting that named Ashvale specifically as a target for the Draven clan's long-delayed revenge. Elena watched him struggle with the full weight of what he had unknowingly participated in, the trust he had extended so freely to a woman who had calculated every gentle smile, every trembling excuse, every moment of apparent fragility with the precision of a strategist rather than the vulnerability of a genuine victim. "The child," Roman said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "If she is not who she claimed to be, I do not know if the child is even mine." "That is a question we may never fully answer," Elena said, her voice softening slightly despite everything. "But it is a question that matters far less than the larger truth before us. Lysandra came to this pack with the intention of using an innocent child as a weapon against everything Ashvale represents. Whatever her true motivations, whatever the truth of the child's parentage, we cannot allow her scheme to succeed." Roman nodded slowly, though the weight of the revelation clearly still settled heavily upon him. "What do we do now?" "We bring this before the council," Elena said, formally, with full evidence, so that no one can later claim we acted without cause or proof. Lysandra deserves the chance to answer for what she has done, but the pack deserves the truth laid bare before them, without doubt or ambiguity. Roman agreed, though his voice carried the exhaustion of a man grappling with betrayal from multiple directions at once. Elena felt a complicated mixture of vindication and sorrow, watching him absorb the truth, relief that the evidence had finally convinced him, grief for the trust that had been so thoroughly shattered between them over the past weeks. But beneath these personal emotions, a clearer resolve had taken hold within her, the same steady determination that had carried her through every careful step of this investigation. Lysandra's scheme had nearly succeeded, built patiently over weeks of calculated deception. But it had not succeeded, not yet, and Elena intended to ensure it never would. The council hearing would need to be prepared carefully, evidence organized, witnesses gathered, a case built strong enough to withstand whatever defense Lysandra might attempt, once confronted with the truth of her identity and intentions. Elena knew such preparation would take time during which Lysandra remained unaware that her carefully constructed disguise had finally begun to crack. But time, Elena had learned over these past difficult weeks, could be an ally as easily as an enemy, when wielded with patience and purpose. She intended to use whatever time remained before the confrontation to ensure that when the truth finally emerged before the full council, it would emerge undeniable, complete, and impossible for anyone, even Lysandra herself, to dismiss or deny. Preparing the case against Lysandra required a precision Elena had never before applied to any task in her life. Not even the delicate diplomacy of settling disputes between rival families, or the careful negotiations that came with managing Ashvale's relationships with neighboring territories. Every piece of evidence needed to be verified twice over, every witness prepared to speak clearly and without hesitation before a council that would not easily accept accusations against a woman who had, for weeks, presented herself so convincingly as fragile and blameless. Elena knew that if even one detail proved shaky under scrutiny, Lysandra would seize upon that weakness and use it to unravel the entire case, turning the council's sympathy back in her favor through the same practiced manipulation that had served her so well since her arrival. Marcus took charge of organizing the historical evidence, cross-referencing the letter he had retrieved from the retired guard with the records Elena had discovered in the manor's private archive, building a timeline that traced the Draven clan's exile through 3 generations to Lysandra's calculated infiltration of Ashvale. He worked with the same careful diligence he had once brought to his years as Beta, ensuring every document could withstand challenge, every date and detail confirmed against multiple sources. Elena, meanwhile, focused on the witnesses whose testimony would give the council a clear picture of the pattern Lysandra had woven since her first night at Ashvale. She met privately with Edwin, preparing him to speak about the pointed questions regarding border patrols, the request to keep their conversation secret. She met with Charlotte, confirming the details of the pregnancy tea and the private inquiries about the manor's succession records. Each conversation required careful reassurance, as both young pack members expressed nervousness about testifying publicly against a woman the pack had, until now, largely accepted as a sympathetic newcomer. "You will not be alone in this," Elena told Charlotte during one such meeting, holding the younger woman's hand steady within her own. "The truth protects those brave enough to speak it, and I will stand beside you throughout the hearing, ensuring no one questions your courage in coming forward." Charlotte nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in her expression. What if the council does not believe us? What if she convinces them we are simply jealous or mistaken? "That is why we build this case so carefully," Elena said. "Not on suspicion alone, but on evidence that speaks for itself. Evidence too consistent and too thoroughly documented to dismiss as mere jealousy or misunderstanding." The preparations consumed nearly 2 weeks, during which Elena maintained her public composure with increasing difficulty, watching Lysandra move through the manor with the same practiced grace she had displayed since her arrival, entirely unaware that the ground beneath her carefully constructed disguise had begun to crumble. Roman, too, struggled to maintain his usual demeanor, his interactions with Lysandra growing noticeably more distant, though he took care not to reveal the full extent of what he now knew, understanding the importance of surprise when the formal accusation finally came before the council. Elena noticed, with some relief, that Roman had begun spending more time with her again during these weeks of preparation, seeking her counsel on matters he might once have dismissed as simple pack administration, listening more carefully to her observations and insights. Whatever damage Lysandra's manipulation had done to their marriage, the shared purpose of exposing the truth seemed to be slowly rebuilding some fragment of the trust that had eroded over the previous weeks. "I keep thinking about how easily I was fooled," Roman admitted one evening, as they reviewed the final details of the case together in his study. "I prided myself on being a fair alpha, someone who protected the vulnerable within our pack. I never considered that vulnerability itself could be weaponized against me." "You are not the first alpha to be deceived by careful manipulation," Elena said gently. "The Draven clan built an entire strategy around exploiting exactly the kind of compassion that makes a good leader. Your fault was not weakness, Roman. It was trusting a system of values that a truly dangerous person learned to exploit." Roman looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression that reminded Elena, briefly, of the man she had first fallen for years earlier, before the weight of leadership and the careful manipulation of an outsider had come between them. "I am sorry, Elena, for the cloak, for the wine. For every moment I chose to see her fragility over your strength, when your strength was never something that should have excused my absence." Elena accepted the apology with a small nod, though she knew the full healing of their marriage would require far more than words spoken in the quiet privacy of a shared study. Trust, once broken, rebuilt itself slowly, through consistent action rather than singular moments of contrition. But it was, at least, a beginning, and beginnings mattered. As the date for the council hearing approached, Marcus uncovered one final piece of evidence that strengthened their case considerably. Through careful inquiry among the pack's messenger network, he discovered that Lysandra had been sending regular correspondence to a contact in a village several days' ride to the south, a village that, according to the retired guard's testimony, served as a gathering point for scattered members of the Draven clan following their exile generations earlier. Elena and Marcus intercepted one such letter before it could be delivered, careful to do so without revealing their involvement, working through a trusted messenger who owed his position entirely to Marcus's earlier patronage. The letter, when opened and read, confirmed everything they had already suspected, detailing Lysandra's confidence that the pack fully trusted her, that Roman remained entirely devoted to protecting her, and that the timing for revealing the child as Ashvale's heir would come within the next several weeks, once the pregnancy could no longer be concealed. The letter also revealed something Elena had not anticipated, a detail that added new weight and urgency to their preparations. Lysandra was not acting alone within Ashvale. She referenced a second contact already embedded within the pack's ranks, someone positioned to help ensure the council's acceptance of the child's claim once it was formally presented, someone whose loyalty had apparently been secured through means the letter did not specify. "We need to identify this second contact before the hearing," Elena said, her voice tight with new concern, as she reread the letter's careful phrasing. "If Lysandra has an ally already positioned within our own council or pack leadership, our case could face resistance we have not prepared for." Marcus agreed, and the following days brought renewed urgency to their investigation, carefully observing the pack's council members and senior leadership for any sign of unusual behavior, any indication of loyalty misplaced or compromised. It was Elena herself who eventually noticed the pattern, subtle but unmistakable once she began looking for it, in the behavior of Councilman Victor, an elder who had served Ashvale's leadership for over 2 decades, and who had, curiously, been among the first to defend Lysandra whenever questions arose about her sudden and unexplained arrival at the pack. Careful investigation revealed that Victor had, years earlier, formed a connection with a distant business partner, whose true identity, once traced through old correspondence and financial records, connected directly back to the scattered remnants of the Draven clan. Whether Victor had known the full truth of this connection, or had simply been slowly cultivated over years of careful relationship building, Elena could not say for certain. but the evidence was enough to warrant caution, enough to ensure that when the formal accusation against Lysandra came before the council, Victor's potential bias would be accounted for in advance. "This changes our approach," Marcus said, when Elena shared what she had discovered. "We cannot simply present our case to the full council as originally planned, not with Victor potentially positioned to undermine our evidence or sway opinion in Lysandra's favor. Then we present the evidence in a way that leaves no room for doubt, regardless of who might attempt to challenge it," Elena said, her resolve hardening further with each new complication that emerged. "We gather every witness, every document, every confirmed detail, and we build a case so thoroughly airtight that even a compromised councilman cannot find room to twist it in Lysandra's favor." The final days before the hearing passed in a blur of careful preparation, Elena and Marcus reviewing every detail again and again, ensuring nothing had been overlooked, no weakness left unaddressed. Roman, now fully committed to exposing the truth despite the personal pain it clearly caused him, worked alongside them, using his authority as alpha to quietly ensure the hearing would be conducted fairly, with full opportunity for every witness to speak without fear of retribution. Elena found herself, in these final days, thinking often of her mother's old lessons on patience and strategy, on the importance of never revealing one's hand before the moment was right. She had waited weeks, gathering evidence piece by careful piece, resisting the urge to confront Lysandra directly before the case against her was complete. That patience, she now understood, had been essential, had allowed them to uncover not just Lysandra's true identity, but the full scope of her scheme, including the compromised councilman, who might otherwise have helped her escape justice entirely. The night before the hearing, Elena stood once more before the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, lifting out the Luna cloak that had been mended weeks earlier, the tier carefully repaired by the village seamstress, until only the faintest trace remained, visible only to those who knew exactly where to look. She ran her fingers over the repaired seam, remembering the night it had first torn, the moment she had stood alone in front of the entire pack, while her husband comforted another woman. Tomorrow, she thought, that moment would finally receive its answer. Tomorrow, the fragile mask Lysandra had worn so carefully for weeks would finally be stripped away before the very pack she had sought to deceive. Elena folded the cloak carefully and set it aside, ready for the ceremony that would follow, whatever the hearing's outcome. She had done everything within her power to build a case grounded in truth and evidence, rather than mere suspicion or jealousy. Now, finally, it would be time to present that truth before the council, and let justice, rather than deception, determine the future of Ashvale's leadership and bloodline. The great hall had never felt so full, every seat occupied, every corner lined with pack members, who had come at Roman's summons without knowing exactly what the council session would reveal. Elena stood at the front of the room beside Roman, her back straight, her expression composed, despite the storm of nerves she carefully kept hidden beneath years of practiced discipline. Lysandra sat near the front as well, still unaware of what awaited her, her hand resting protectively over the slight curve of her stomach, her expression carrying its usual careful blend of gentle uncertainty and quiet grace. Councilman Victor sat among the other elders at the long table facing the gathered pack, and Elena noted, with grim satisfaction, that Marcus had positioned himself close enough to watch the older wolf's reactions throughout the proceedings, ready to note any sign of interference or attempted manipulation. Roman rose first, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "We have gathered today to address a matter of great importance to the future and safety of this pack. Evidence has come before myself and the Luna regarding the true identity of a woman who has, for the past several weeks, presented herself to this pack under false pretenses." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, and Elena watched Lysandra's expression shift, the first crack appearing in her carefully maintained composure, though she recovered quickly, her eyes wide with what still appeared to be genuine confusion. "I do not understand," Lysandra said, her voice trembling in the familiar register that had, until now, always won her sympathy from those around her. "What false pretenses? I have only sought shelter and belonging here, nothing more." "Then perhaps," Elena said, stepping forward to address the hall directly, "you can explain why the guard who once served your family, before your father's exile, recognized you immediately by the name Lysandra, daughter of the Draven clan. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena watched the color drain from Lysandra's face, watched the trembling in her hands shift from performance to something that looked, for the first time, like genuine fear rather than calculated vulnerability. "I do not know what you are talking about," Lysandra said, though her voice had lost much of its earlier conviction. Marcus stepped forward then, presenting the faded letter to the council table, reading aloud the careful handwriting that named Ashvale specifically as a target for the Draven clan's long-delayed revenge against the alliance that had exiled them generations earlier. He detailed the retired guard's testimony, the confirmation of Lysandra's true identity, the family history that connected her arrival at Ashvale to a strategy first attempted 3 generations before, using deception and a false claim of heirship to seize territory that could not be won through honest challenge. Throughout Marcus's presentation, Elena watched Lysandra's composure crumble piece by piece, the fragile mask she had worn so carefully for weeks finally beginning to slip, revealing something colder and more calculating underneath. By the time Charlotte and Edwin came forward to offer their own testimony, describing the secret pregnancy tea and the pointed questions about border patrols and succession law, Lysandra's expression had shifted entirely. The wide, tearful eyes replaced by something sharp and furious, the gentle, trembling voice replaced by cold, controlled silence. "This is absurd," Lysandra finally said, rising from her seat, though her voice now carried none of its earlier fragility. "You expect this pack to believe the word of servants and children over my own testimony?" "We expect this pack to believe evidence," Elena said calmly, gathered carefully, and confirmed through multiple independent sources. "Your own family's letter, written by your mother's hand, names Ashvale specifically as a target for exactly this kind of scheme." Lysandra's eyes flashed with something dangerous, and for a moment, Elena thought she might attempt some final desperate denial. Instead, she turned toward Councilman Victor, seated among the elders, her expression carrying an unmistakable plea for intervention. "Councilman," she said, "surely you can speak to my character, to the kindness and gentleness I have shown this pack since my arrival." But Victor, Elena noted with quiet satisfaction, remained silent, his own expression carrying the pale, uncertain look of a man, realizing that his own connections had just been exposed alongside the woman he had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, helped protect. "Councilman Victor," Roman said, his voice carrying new authority as he addressed the elder directly, "the council will also need to examine your own connections to individuals associated with the Draven clan, connections uncovered during this same investigation." The hall erupted into stunned murmurs at this revelation, and Elena watched Victor's face pale further, his hands trembling slightly, as he realized the full scope of what had been uncovered, extended beyond Lysandra herself, to touch his own reputation, and standing within the pack. "I did not know," Victor said quickly, though his voice lacked full conviction. "I had no knowledge of any connection to the Draven clan. My business dealings were entirely separate from pack matters." "That may well be true," Elena said, though her tone made clear that the matter would require further investigation before any final judgment could be reached. "But for now, our concern remains the woman before us, and the false claim she has sought to establish within our pack's bloodline." Lysandra, seeing that Victor's support offered no true protection, straightened her posture, abandoning entirely the fragile persona she had maintained for weeks. Her voice, when she spoke again, carried none of its earlier trembling uncertainty, replaced instead by something cold and unmistakably proud. "You think exposing me changes anything?" she said, addressing the hall directly now, her gaze sweeping across the gathered pack with open contempt. "My family was wronged 3 generations ago, driven from lands that were rightfully ours, through petty accusations and cowardly exile. I came here not as a villain, but as someone reclaiming what was stolen. Your family attempted to steal territory through deception," Roman said firmly, "just as you have attempted here. There is no reclaiming in that. There is only theft, dressed up in whatever justification your family has told itself for 3 generations. The child I carry," Lysandra said, her hand moving once more to her stomach, though the gesture now felt less like tender protection and more like a final, calculated weapon, "is innocent in all of this." Whatever you believe about me, that child deserves recognition. Elena felt the weight of the hall's attention shift toward her and Roman, waiting to see how they would respond to this final claim. She understood, even now, that the truth of the child's parentage remained uncertain, that whatever happened next would need to account for the well-being of a life that had not chosen the circumstances of its conception, regardless of the deception surrounding it. The child's innocence is not in question, Elena said carefully, choosing her words with the same precision she had applied to every step of this long investigation. But innocence does not grant a false claim to Ashvale's leadership. Pack law is clear on matters of legitimate succession, and no child, however innocent, can inherit a bloodline through deception rather than truth. The hall fell silent, waiting for whatever judgment would come next, the full weight of weeks of careful investigation finally converging toward its inevitable conclusion. The council retired briefly to deliberate, leaving the great hall filled with tense, whispered conversation, as pack members processed everything that had just unfolded before them. Elena remained standing at the front of the room, Roman beside her, both of them silent, as they waited for the elders to return with whatever judgment they would render. Lysandra had been asked to wait apart from the gathered crowd, seated now beneath the watchful eyes of two senior guards, her earlier composure entirely abandoned. Elena watched her from across the hall, noting how different she appeared now, stripped of the fragile mask that had served her so effectively for weeks. Her posture had straightened, her expression hardened into something calculating and cold, the true face of a woman raised from childhood to execute a scheme 3 generations in the making. "Do you regret any of it?" Elena asked, unable to resist approaching her during the recess, needing to understand, if only for her own peace of mind, whether any genuine remorse existed beneath the calculated deception. Lysandra looked up at her, and for a moment, something almost like respect flickered across her features. "You are cleverer than I gave you credit for," she said. "I underestimated you, assumed your devotion to duty would blind you to what was happening in your own home." "That is not an answer to my question," Elena said. Lysandra's expression shifted, something almost weary settling over her features. "I was raised for this purpose since I could walk. My mother taught me every gesture, every trembling word, every way to appear harmless, while working towards something far larger. I do not know if regret is something I am capable of feeling about a life I never chose, only inherited." Elena studied her for a long moment, feeling an unexpected flicker of something close to pity beneath her lingering anger. Whatever cruelty Lysandra had shown toward Ashvale, toward Elena's own marriage and standing within the pack, she had also been shaped by generations of ambition and grievance passed down like a birthright she had never been permitted to question. "The child deserves better than being used as a weapon," Elena said finally. "The child deserves a home," Lysandra replied, and for the first time, something genuine seemed to break through her calculated composure. "Whatever else is true, I did not lie about wanting my child to have a place to belong." Elena did not respond immediately, considering the weight of this admission alongside everything else that had transpired. Before she could speak further, the council returned, filing back into the hall with expressions grave and resolute, signaling that their deliberation had reached its conclusion. Roman called the hall back to order, and the elders took their places once more at the long table, Councilman Victor notably absent from among them, having been asked to step aside pending further investigation into his own connections. An elder named Beatrice, the most senior member of the remaining council, rose to deliver their judgment. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, Beatrice began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "This council finds that the woman known to this pack as Seraphina is in truth Lysandra, daughter of the exiled Draven clan, and that her presence at Ashvale was established under false pretenses, with the explicit intention of claiming leadership through deception rather than legitimate succession." A murmur of confirmation rippled through the gathered crowd, though everyone remained silent enough to hear the elders' continued judgment. "Pack law is clear regarding claims of false heirship," Beatrice continued. "Any child presented as heir to Ashvale's leadership through deception, misrepresentation, or fraudulent claim to bloodline shall be denied recognition as legitimate heir, regardless of biological parentage, until and unless the truth of that child's origins can be established through proper and transparent means. Elena listened carefully, understanding the careful balance the council had struck, protecting the pack's leadership structure from Lysandra's scheme while leaving room, however narrow, for the child's future circumstances to be addressed separately from the mother's punishment. Regarding Lysandra herself, Beatrice said, turning to address the woman directly, this council finds sufficient evidence of intentional deception and threat to Ashvale's stability to warrant immediate banishment from these territories, effective upon this judgment, under guard escort, to ensure her departure is conducted safely and without further incident. Lysandra received this judgment without visible reaction, her expression settling into something resigned rather than surprised, as though she had anticipated this outcome from the moment her true identity had been revealed. The matter of the child, Beatrice continued, will require further discussion between the Luna, the Alpha, and this council, to determine an appropriate arrangement that protects both the pack's leadership integrity and the well-being of an innocent life caught within circumstances not of its own making. Roman stepped forward then, his voice carrying the weight of authority Elena had not heard from him in weeks, ever since Lysandra's careful manipulation had begun eroding his usual clarity and confidence. This council's judgment is accepted. Lysandra will be escorted from Ashvale territory by sundown, with provisions sufficient for her journey, but with clear understanding that return to these lands will not be permitted. As the guards moved to escort Lysandra from the hall, she paused briefly before Elena, her expression unreadable in a way that felt entirely different from her earlier practiced fragility, something more honest in its complexity. You could have simply exposed me without offering any consideration for the child, Lysandra said quietly, low enough that only Elena could hear. I did not expect that kindness from you. I am not offering you kindness, Elena said, her voice steady and clear. I am offering the child a chance that was not stolen through deception. What happens next depends on choices that have not yet been made, by any of us. Lysandra nodded slowly, something almost like understanding, passing between them, despite everything that had transpired. Then the guards led her from the hall, and the great room erupted into a wave of conversation, pack members processing the revelation of weeks of careful deception finally laid bare before them. Roman turned to Elena once the hall had begun to clear, his expression carrying a complicated mixture of relief and lingering grief. It is over, he said, though his voice carried uncertainty about what exactly came next for them, for their marriage, for the pack's future stability. It is over, Elena agreed, but there is still much to rebuild. Trust does not return simply because the truth has been exposed. Roman nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I know I have much to make right between us, Elena. I let a carefully constructed illusion of fragility blind me to the strength and loyalty standing right beside me all along. Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against the weeks of hurt and doubt she had carried since the night the cloak first tore. She did not yet know if their marriage could fully heal from what had transpired, from the secret meetings and misplaced trust that had nearly cost their pack its entire leadership structure. But she recognized, in his voice and expression, genuine remorse rather than mere convenience, and that recognition offered, at least, a foundation from which rebuilding might begin. We will find our way forward, she said finally, together, if you are willing to earn back what was lost. I am willing, Roman said, and for the first time in weeks, Elena believed him completely. Outside the great hall, the guards led Lysandra toward the northern border, her figure growing smaller against the horizon as the sun began its slow descent toward evening. Elena watched from the manor's highest window, feeling the complicated weight of victory mixed with lingering uncertainty about what still lay ahead, for the pack, for her marriage, and for the innocent child whose future now rested in decisions yet to be made. The immediate threat had passed, but the work of healing, both for Ashvale and for the fractured trust between Elena and Roman, had only just begun. 3 months passed before Ashvale felt fully like itself again, the shadow of Lysandra's deception gradually fading as the pack settled back into the familiar rhythms of daily life, though the memory of those weeks lingered in careful conversations and cautious glances that would likely never fully disappear. Councilman Victor had been formally removed from the council following further investigation, which confirmed that while he had not knowingly conspired with the Draven clan, His years of careless business dealings had left him vulnerable to manipulation in ways that made him unfit to continue serving in a position of trust. The council had shown him mercy in allowing him to remain within Ashvale territory, stripped of his former authority, but permitted to live quietly among the pack he had inadvertently endangered. The matter of the child had resolved itself with more clarity than Elena had initially expected. Word eventually reached Ashvale, through Marcus's careful network of contacts, that Lysandra had settled in a distant village, far from any territory connected to the old alliance, choosing to raise her child away from the ambitions and grievances that had defined her own upbringing. Roman had arranged, quietly and without fanfare, for a modest provision to be sent toward the child's care, not as an acknowledgement of paternity, which remained uncertain and largely irrelevant to Ashvale's leadership concerns, but as a simple act of decency toward an innocent life, caught in circumstances entirely beyond its control. Elena found herself thinking of that decision often in the months that followed, a small mercy extended, even after everything Lysandra's scheme had threatened to destroy. It felt, in its own way, like the final piece of closure needed to fully move past the weeks of deception and doubt that had nearly unraveled everything Ashvale represented. Her marriage to Roman had not healed instantly, nor had she expected it to. Trust, once so thoroughly tested, required patient rebuilding, conversation by careful conversation, gesture by consistent gesture. Roman had thrown himself into that rebuilding with genuine dedication, seeking her counsel on pack matters he might once have handled alone, making space for her opinions and leadership in ways that had grown increasingly rare during the weeks of Lysandra's careful manipulation. Slowly, gradually, the easy trust that had once defined their bond began returning, though tempered now with a wisdom neither of them had possessed before. Marcus remained a trusted advisor throughout this period of rebuilding, his loyalty and careful investigation having proven essential to uncovering the truth before Lysandra's scheme could reach its final, irreversible conclusion. Elena often thought that without his steady presence and old contacts throughout the region, the truth might never have surfaced in time, and Ashvale's leadership might have fallen into the hands of a false heir, born from generations of calculated ambition rather than genuine belonging. The founding gala arrived again as autumn settled over the territory, marking a full year since the night Lysandra had first torn Elena's Luna cloak in front of the entire pack. Elena had thought carefully about how to mark this occasion, wanting the evening to serve not merely as another celebration, but as a clear symbol of everything Ashvale had overcome, and everything it continued to protect. She wore the mended cloak that evening, the same silver fabric that had been so carefully repaired months earlier, though Roman had insisted on commissioning new embroidery along its edges. Delicate silver thread woven into patterns that represented strength and renewal, a visible testament to everything the cloak, and the marriage it symbolized, had endured and survived. As the pack gathered once more in the great hall, filled now with music and laughter that felt entirely different from the tense, whispered gossip that had followed the previous year's incident, Roman rose to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the same authority Elena had first fallen for years earlier, now tempered with hard-won wisdom. "A year ago," Roman began, "this pack witnessed a moment that many believed signaled misfortune, a torn cloak on the night of our founding gala, but I have come to understand that moment differently now. It was not misfortune that tore that cloak. It was the beginning of a truth that needed to be uncovered, a threat that needed to be exposed, and a Luna whose strength and wisdom protected this pack in ways I failed to fully recognize until it was nearly too late." Elena felt the weight of the pack's attention shift toward her, and she met their gazes with the same calm composure she had carried throughout the difficult months of investigation and revelation, though now that composure carried genuine warmth rather than careful restraint. "Elena did not simply survive deception," Roman continued. "She uncovered it, piece by careful piece, protecting this pack's leadership and bloodline through patience, intelligence, and unwavering dedication to the truth. Tonight, I want this pack to fully understand and honor what she accomplished, not simply as my mate, but as the Luna who saved Ashvale from a threat that very nearly succeeded in claiming everything we have built across generations." The hall erupted into warm applause, and Elena felt tears she had not expected pricking at the corners of her eyes, the weight of months of careful vigilance and quiet strength finally acknowledged before the entire pack that had, at times, doubted her position and judgment during the difficult weeks of Lysandra's manipulation. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Elena found a quiet moment alone with Roman near the edge of the hall, watching the pack dance and celebrate with a joy that felt genuinely restored rather than merely performed. "I am proud of what we have rebuilt," Roman said quietly, his hand finding hers in the dim candlelight. "Not just our marriage, but our understanding of what truly matters in leading this pack." "We learned something important," Elena said, watching the celebration continue around them. "That strength and fragility are not opposites. That true partnership requires seeing beyond surface impressions to the truth beneath them." "I will not make that mistake again," Roman said, his voice carrying quiet conviction. Elena smiled, feeling the warmth of the celebration and the security of their rebuilt trust settling over her like the cloak she wore, mended but stronger for having survived its tearing. "Neither of us will," she said. "We have both learned what it costs to look away from the truth in favor of comfortable illusions." As the music continued and the pack celebrated late into the night, Elena thought of the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The torn cloak, the careful investigation, the painful confrontation, and finally, the slow, patient work of rebuilding trust between herself and Roman, and between the pack and its leadership. Ashvale had faced a threat that very nearly succeeded through patience and calculated deception, a scheme 3 generations in the making that had almost claimed everything the pack's founders had worked to build. But that threat had been met, in the end, with equal patience, careful investigation, and unwavering commitment to truth over comfortable illusion. The mended cloak Elena wore that evening would remain, for years to come, a symbol within Ashvale's history. Not of misfortune, but of resilience. A reminder that even the deepest tears could be repaired, made stronger through the careful work of those willing to face difficult truths, rather than retreat into easier, more comfortable deceptions. As the celebration finally began winding down, and pack members slowly made their way home beneath a sky full of stars, Elena stood beside Roman at the entrance of the great hall, watching their people depart with contentment and security restored fully to their community. Whatever challenges Ashvale might face in the future, she felt confident now that they would face them together, with the hard-won wisdom that had come from surviving Lysandra's careful deception. The Luna cloak settled comfortably around her shoulders, mended and strengthened, much like the marriage and leadership it represented. Elena had faced a threat that sought to claim her position through false pretense and calculated manipulation. She had met that threat with patience, intelligence, and unwavering determination to protect the truth, no matter how long it took to uncover it. And in the end, that truth had prevailed, restoring not just her position as Luna, but the deeper trust and partnership that had first drawn her and Roman together, now rebuilt on a foundation far stronger than the one that had existed before Lysandra's arrival had ever tested its limits. Ashvale moved forward from that night stronger than it had been before, its leadership secure, its bloodline protected, and its Luna standing exactly where she belonged, at the side of her alpha, wearing a cloak that told the story of everything she had overcome to remain there.